Buenas tardes. It's my pleasure to be here today in Puebla, Mexico, and it's so great to see you all. I'm feeling a little bit humbled, actually. It's so great to be surrounded by so many exciting ideas and people who are passionate about what they believe in. And to some extent, I feel out of place a little bit. I'm kind of a little bit of a regular person who just fell into doing something extraordinary almost by accident, but by a little bit of hard work and a lot of perseverance, things like that are possible. So I'd like to share with you guys the story of how I got involved and what I brought with me over the years. So my story begins when I was in grade 1. So I remember I went to a school in Kemptville, Ontario, Canada, so a very small country town, and life was very simple. It was go to school, don't get your parents too angry, wait for recess to happen, and then wait for recess to happen again. And it was very simple, like a 6-year-old. That's what life is supposed to be like. And I enjoyed life. It was great. And I remember what brought me out of that funk is we used to do a charity fundraiser at my school every year. It was just part of the routine that we had to do. So I remember when we were in junior kindergarten, we had to do things like we raised money for cancer, we did things like that. So I remember we got to my grade 1 class, and my teacher brought in this list with our charity project for the year and told us what we were going to be doing. And she said we were going to raise money for developing countries, for things that people didn't have, apparently. And we were a little bit surprised. We said, okay, we didn't know this was going on, but okay, let's do it. And she went through a list of things that people didn't have. So 1 cent was for a pencil, $2 was for a blanket, and so on and so on. And then she got to the point where she said $70 would buy a well, so about 300 pesos. And when she got there, she explained to us that kids our age were dying because they didn't have clean water, and they couldn't go to school because of it. So she was talking to my class of 6- and 7-year-olds, so we were very confused. We said, why don't they just go to the water fountain? Duh, problem solved. Because it was that simple for us. We couldn't understand. So my teacher explained to us, like the children we were, no, people don't have water fountains all over the world, and sometimes they have to walk as far as 5 kilometers to go get water. I didn't know how far 5 kilometers was. So I remember my teacher explained it to us by saying 5,000 steps. And that didn't help because I couldn't count that high. But I remember I counted the steps it took me to get from my classroom to the water fountain. And I counted 10. And we were 6 and 7 years old, so I think at the time, one thing that was stressed upon us more than anything was this concept of sharing and this concept of justice. That if things weren't fair, you or your teacher or someone in a position of power would do all they could to make it fair. And so when we were told this, we thought the world wasn't sharing. So we were a little bit aggravated at my teacher because we felt we were being lied to. And my teacher shrugged and said, well, if you want to do something about it, you can raise money for something on this list. So we were deciding who was going to raise money for what. And the well came up. It was the most expensive thing. And I raised my hand. And my teacher, Mrs. Prest, she kind of raised an eyebrow. Because I wasn't really a kid who did anything. I sat in the back. I didn't open my mouth. I didn't do anything more than what was expected of me. And she said, are you sure, Ryan, this is going to be a big part of our fundraiser? And I said, don't worry. I've got a plan. I'm going to go home to my parents, I'm going to ask them for $70, they're going to give it to me, and then I'll come back and give it to you. And I thought it was a great plan, so I went home to my folks and said, can I have $70 to build a well? It's not like I wanted something for myself. My parents would see that I was being a virtuous person and congratulate me, and then give me the money, and I would give it to my teacher, and I wouldn't have to feel guilty, and everyone in the world would have clean water. So I thought it was the best plan. And I came home with the idea, and I said, Mom, Dad, can I have $70 to build a well? And they kind of just tilted their heads and said, ah, that's cute. But no, and ignored me. And I remember I didn't let it go. For some reason, I thought that if I could just get to $70, then the entire world would have clean water, and I just wouldn't let it go. So I remember we were having this one a Sunday family dinner. So, a nice dinner, and my mother used to have this thing where she hated it when we pointed. She thought it was the most rude thing a person could do. She always threatened to break off our fingers when we pointed. So you didn't point anywhere near my mom. But I remember we were having this family dinner, and I pointed right at her, and I said, You don't get it. Someone just died because they don't have clean water, and you didn't help them. So I got a timeout, but my parents saw that I was serious and that I wasn't going to let it go. So I remember they sat me down and they said, Ryan, if you're serious about this, we're not just going to give you the money because then you wouldn't learn anything. So what we can do is we can give you chores on top of the chores you already do, and then we can give you something magical called an allowance. And if you're serious about it, you can fundraise the money that way. So I did things like, I already had to do things like clear the table, make my bed, walk the dog. Now I had to do things like washing windows, shoveling snow, vacuuming. And I got a few dollars at the end of each week. And I remember it was actually a Lenten project. So it was supposed to last 40 days. And by the time 40 days had gone by, I had only raised $25. So I failed. But I just had this idea in my head. If I could just get to $70, then the entire world would have clean water. So I kept on going. And it took me 4 months until I was finally able to raise the $70. And I was really excited. I got the day off of school. I had this big cookie tin filled with change. And I got to go into Ottawa to a place that built clean water wells. And I got all dressed up. This is what we used to wear in the 90s when suspenders were in fashion. And I was so excited because I was going to bring the entire world clean water. And they looked at me and they did the same thing my folks did when I came home with the idea. They kind of tilted their heads and said, "Aw, that's adorable. But it's going to cost a lot more than the $70 to build a well. It's going to cost at least $2,000. But good work. Now go on your way, leave." And I couldn't, my math still wasn't that great, so I was doing more chores around my house to try to raise this $2,000. And it was slowly seeping in that wasn't going to be the case, that I couldn't raise $2,000 by doing chores around my house. So I remember I went back to my school and talked to my classmates about it, and they said, "Are you still doing that? Like, relax, give it up. You didn't build a well, but you did something. Now just leave it at that. Like, let's go have fun at recess." And I remember I asked them for money, and they said no. And I remember I had to get creative. I had to make it relatable to people. So I remember I talked about how passionate I was, and then this was back in 1998. So this is when things like Pokemon cards first came out. So I remember from my first fundraiser, I had a Pokemon card raffle. And it made a little bit of money. And then my teacher saw what we were doing and said, "Oh, are you still fundraising for that?" And I said, "Yes." "And why don't you give a presentation to the class?" I really didn't want to. I was very nervous as a kid. I went to speech therapy. I couldn't pronounce my words. But at the same time, my folks were telling me, if you want to do this, you're going to have to expand your comfort zone. So I did, and then I gave a bigger speech at the Kemptville Rotary Club, and the words might not have gotten across, but the message did. Here was this kid who wanted to build a well and make a difference. And through a lot of hard work, a year later, we were able to build that well. And it went towards the community of Angola Primary School in northern Uganda. And the school enrollment actually jumped from 700 to 1,400 students just because the well was put in. And it was great. And I would have been growing up at the time, and I realized that one well wasn't going to bring the world clean water. So I kept on going, kept on fundraising. And then it got to the point where when I was 9, my neighbors used to travel a lot for a living, and they gave my family air mile points. So we were actually able to go and see the well. And I remember there was this huge celebration. There were over 5,000 people from the local community. There was a feast and a festival, and everyone was just so happy, so pumped because they had clean water. And I don't have a smile that lights up on my face because I can have a shower in the morning or a glass of clean water. So to see what something I considered so small have that much of an impact on someone's life, it gave me the motivation to keep on going. So I remember that's when it became less and less of my project, and it became everyone's project. People from my community, people from around my country, from around the world started to pitch in, and we were able to establish the Ryan's Well Foundation. And over the last 15 years, we've been able to do not only one well, but over 1,000 wells that have gone towards the completion in 16 countries that have helped 800,000 people. But the most bizarre thing is this all happened because of my failed grade 1 school project. It could have easily amounted into nothing, but the fact that I stuck with it and I was stubborn enough to not listen to people who knew better about the situation, who said, "No, Ryan, one well isn't going to bring the world clean water," no, Ryan, you're not going to be able to raise $2,000 on your own. The fact that I was able to get through that led to a lot of work being done. So sometimes, even if it's the most logical, practical people in the world telling you what to do, sometimes it makes more sense to be stubborn instead. So a story about how this can affect someone's life is when I was in grade 2, my grade 2 teacher heard about what happened in grade 1 and thought it was really neat, but thought we could expand on the project. So we all got pen pals at the school where the well was built. And my pen pal ended up to be a kid named Jimmy, who, through a very long story, ended up becoming my brother. But that's a story for another day. Jimmy went to the school before the well was built and after the well was built. Before the well was built, Jimmy used to have to get up very early in the morning to get water for his family. He used to get up at midnight, walk 6 kilometers with 2 big jerry cans to the nearest well, because there wasn't one at his village or his school. And then he used to come back, and then do it again, and then do it one more time. And then I like it when Jimmy tells the story, because then he would say, then I would have the privilege to go to school. When I was a kid, I didn't think going to school was a privilege. It was something your parents made you do. But then when the well was put in, he was able to go to school and not have to fall asleep in class and bring the water home at the end of the day. So you really can't put a tag on what it's worth having water. So one question that I want you guys to kind of dwell in the back of your minds, and what we're here today thinking about, is what are you passionate about? And when I was a kid, I was lucky enough to find my passion when I was 6. It just hit me so hard that kids my age couldn't go to school because they didn't have clean water. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world to not raise my hand. I think over the last 17 years, that's been the hardest thing I've ever had to do, was raise my hand in my grade 1 class. I didn't like to raise my hand. I didn't want to raise my hand. But the fact that I was able to step outside my comfort zone and do something that I normally wouldn't do ended up to so much work being done. So when you find that thing that you're passionate about, don't let it lay by the wayside. Get involved, because you may be robbing the world of something great. And another thing is, when I was a kid, I used to hear a lot of, I'm only a kid, I only have such a limited capacity for change, like I don't even have an allowance. There's only so much I can do. And when you get older, it changes. When you're a teenager, you find different excuses. Then when you're an adult. And I think one of the most important things to realize is the people that make a difference in this world aren't the superheroes, the activists. I'm not an activist. I'm not a superhero. I like to sleep in on the weekends and play too many video games. But at the same time, that doesn't stop me from trying to make a difference in the world. I think that should empower people to be better change makers, and we need to realize that role. So one story that I want to leave you here today was a story that I heard when I was 8 years old. I went on a television show called The Galloping Gourmet. And it was a show hosted by a man named Graham Kerr. And before I went on the show, he sat me down and he told me a story. He said, Ryan, in life everyone has a cup and a saucer. And he explained to me that for much of his life, his cup was overflowing. And he poured what he didn't need in his saucer back into his cup. So he had more than what he needed, and he told me he kept on refilling his cup. And he told me that he realized somewhere along the way that it made more sense to pour what he didn't need into his saucer into someone else's cup. So it's a simple way of saying if you have more than what you have, you give back and you share with others. The tricky thing about this is I think it's very easy to realize when your cup is overflowing, to get complacent with what you need. So every once in a while, it helps to take a step back and reevaluate what you need to be happy. I'd like to thank you guys so much for listening to me today, and I hope you get something out of this conference. Muchas gracias.